My name is Kate Yavandetti, and I'm actually here representing two organizations, Women Occupy San Diego and the National Lawyers Guild. We have joined together with 10 or 11 other organizations in working on changing the Citizens Review Board. We have talked with members of the council about that. The issue was referred from the Charter Review Committee to this committee. We're looking forward to hearing Chief Zimmerman's report. We've met with her. We've gone over the PERF report, and we see that at least one of the issues that we were very concerned about, and that is the tracking issue, is being dealt with. We have proposed 5 changes. That was one of the changes. We believe that our interests and those of the police department and Chief Zimmerman and the council are the same, and that is that we want to restore public trust in the police department. And we believe that an integral part of this is changing the CRB to make it truly independent and accountable. Our other 4 changes requested are independent investigators rather than investigators through the police department, subpoena power, changing the name to a community review board so that it's more reflective of the community. People don't think it's just for citizens, and having the members chosen by council members to represent the diversity of San Diego. We see that the Los Angeles County of Supervisors is working on the same thing and has approved subpoena power for their new model. The model that we're looking at is almost identical to the model from the county review board. We know that the community wants an independent process that they can trust. This will benefit the police department and the community. We believe that trust will reduce anger, will reduce complaints, and will help relationships between the police department and the community. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next up, Sally Smith. And Ms. Smith will be followed by Judy Neufeld-Fernandez. Ms. Smith, you've got 2 minutes.
I request that the Public Safety Committee place on the agenda a report from Chief Shelley Zimmerman of the child abuse reporting procedures for the police department, to include how the San Diego Police Department handles reports of sexual abuse occurring at schools. This report should include how a dispatcher handles a call from a reporting party, the training of patrol officers dispatched to handle the incident, and how the child abuse unit handles these reports to ensure children are protected from further victimization. I also would like that report to reflect how Chief Zimmerman is going to educate the citizens of San Diego of the correct procedure to report child abuse. There needs to be prosecution of mandated reporters who have failed to report child abuse. I am concerned because I continue to see expulsion of students for sexual assault and the public's unaware of these incidents. I believe that there are other victims and this crime is being underreported. Here are 3 expulsion reports citing 5 incidents in June and July, but parents are unaware of when and where these crimes occurred. The current practices of the San Diego Police Department do not protect children who have been sexually assaulted. Please make a report of the child abuse reporting procedures an item agenda for the Public Safety Committee. And these are the the sexual assault reports that are coming out from San Diego Unified, but parents don't know what schools this is happening is and how often it's happening. This is June and July.
And you'll leave that with us?
Yes.
Thank you. Ms. Hernandez, followed by David Ross. And Ms. Hernandez, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you. In the Critical Response Technical Assessment Review by Police Executive Research Forum, it states on page 22, criminal complaints related to the San Diego Unified School District. PERF heard other important concerns that were voiced by a smaller number of individuals advocating a particular issue. For example, a few individuals expressed their anxiety about the policing of the San Diego Unified School District. Parents of several children complained of a lack of action by the SDPD regarding allegations of child abuse in the school system. They recognize that these crimes fall under the jurisdiction of the San Diego Unified School District Police. These concerned community members asked the SD City Police to increase its communication with the school system to ensure that these crimes are fully investigated. This issue and others may be considered for action by the city and police department as appropriate. And that's the end quote. This, in the PERF report, is a blatant misrepresentation. The small group of concerned citizens included Sally Smith, myself, and another mom. We did not acknowledge San Diego Unified School District Police as having jurisdiction over child abuse investigations because that is against penal code. In reality, we advocated that according to California Penal Code 11165, school district police are denied jurisdiction over school abuse crimes. The law clearly assigns jurisdiction to city police. This makes sense as school police are paid by the district and answer to school officials. How many times does this fact need to be corrected with city and school officials? Why do city police refuse to protect kids in schools? Because the SDPD refuses to take their dutiful jurisdiction, sex abuse crimes are not being investigated and predators remain in our schools.
Our final speaker, Bob Kozuski. And Mr. Kozuski, you've got 2 minutes, sir.
Okay, I've got a presentation here. I'm going to talk about assault and battery at Torrey Pines Glider Fort on July 12th. I'll operate this thing. On July 12th, I went to the glider port and was greeted by one of the staff people there, basically refusing to let me onto our city property. This is Gabriel Jebb, who is one of the instructors there, and behind him in that cart is Robin Marion, who is the concessionaire at that glider port. I was bullied, pushed, and I want you to notice, by the way, in the back corner there, you'll see the girl in the green shirt. That's one of their employees with a camera. She videotaped this entire thing. I asked the police to get a copy of that video, and they have not produced it to this date. Pushed, grabbed, pushed, shoved. I was shoved over a guardrail. You see that piece of paper falling there? That was in my left hand. It was a court order and a copy of the San Diego lease of that glider port. My right hand is holding the camera. So I have no hands to defend myself while this thug pushes me over that guardrail. Again, you see the documents falling. You see me being pushed. This is where I ended up on the ground. It's my feet in the air as I'm filming on the other side of the guardrail after having been shoved over it. He steps over the guardrail. You see the girl in the back who's supposed to be doing the videotaping? Look at her expression. Do you see her hand over her mouth? She's their employee, and she is saying, "Oh my God." That's what that expression says. She says, "Oh my God, I can't believe this just happened." The police came because I reported an assault and battery. I ended up in jail. From that incident, I ended up in jail. I want this committee to investigate this incident and produce a report to the City Council on the ongoing abuses by San Diego police protecting Gabriel Jebb in that concession.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kozuski. And that is it for our non-agenda public comment today. Turning now to members of the committee for any comments. Now to our information agenda. We've got some good informational reports here today. We will start out with our Police Chief, Shelley Zimmerman, and Assistant Chief, Sarah Creighton, and they will update us on the implementation of the Police Executive Research Forum, the PERF recommendations. And thank you both for being here, and thanks for your leadership on these very important issues. With that, the floor is yours. About how much time do you think you'll need for your initial
Probably about
report?
20 minutes or so.
Okay. You got it. The floor is yours.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chair Emerald and members of the committee. I am Shelley Zimmerman, Chief of Police of the San Diego Police Department, and with me here today is Assistant Chief Sarah Creighton, who is the Assistant Chief over our Employee Development and Training Unit and will be assisting in the presentation. Also here that you'll see is that there are many of our Assistant Chiefs and both sworn and civilian commanding officers. As you know, we gave our initial presentation to this same committee on May the 13th, where we discussed all of the recommendations and our status regarding those recommendations. At the time of that particular meeting, we had implemented 15 of the 40 recommendations. A tremendous amount of hard work has gone into implementing the recommendations, and today's presentation will be an update regarding just those 25 recommendations that had not been previously implemented. It is also extremely important that we recognize the demands that are put on all of our personnel. As you have heard me say on many times, we get on average about 1.3 million calls into our communication center every year. And I am extremely proud of the work our officers, civilians, and volunteers do each and every day to help make San Diego one of the safest, largest cities in the United States. These recommendations will help us improve the service we provide to our community. But I also want everyone to know that the men and women of our San Diego Police Department, they are great people who overwhelmingly do the right thing and who proudly serve with honor, courage, pride, and commitment in making San Diego a better place for everyone. As we discussed at the first presentation, the Police Executive Research Forum, or PERF report, was called a Critical Response Technical Assessment Review. And the comprehensive review had 4 major focus areas: officer recruiting and the hiring process, supervision and training, accountability, which included early intervention systems, internal investigations and discipline, and community partnerships. If you recall from our first presentation, this flowchart talks about the components of procedural justice. And all of the recommendations are a component contained within this flowchart, if you would like to refer to this chart during our presentation this afternoon. Now, recommendation number 4. And here's an update to this recommendation. We continue to actively recruit new officers, and we are also reviewing new advertising and marketing proposals to enhance recruitment. Now, just next month in August, we anticipate to have an academy class of at least 50 recruits, which would be the largest recruiting class in many, many years. And the makeup of our last several academies have been 50% minorities and or women, and this next class has the potential of being 60% minorities and or women. The next recommendation, recommendation number 5, the update to this, is that the use of other department panel members began several months ago. Actually, it began in May to enhance our panel diversity and the hiring advisory board. They met in June, and they will continue to meet on a quarterly basis, and this recommendation has been implemented since the last report.
Recommendation number 11 has to do with our annual supervisors training, which is meant to emphasize the principles of procedural justice and how to apply the principles in policing to ensure the community members feel that they're being treated fairly. Because you're going to hear us talk throughout this presentation about our command training, also known as supervisors training, I want to give you a definition of what that is, just so you have sort of a foundational understanding. Command training has been around for about 4 or 5 years. Topics for the training are selected based on a needs assessment, and they are 40 hours of training beyond post requirements for the basic supervision course, the basic management course, continuing education, and San Diego PD's newly promoted sergeants training. So it's an additional 40 hours that we pull our supervisors together for during the summer. As you all are aware, the police department's a 7/24 operation, which means that management doesn't get the benefit of consistently meeting with all supervisors other than at brief supervisors meetings. We used to have supervisors update with a cross-representation of supervisors, not including the captain, but last year we included the captain and restructured the training to be division-specific rather than a cross-representation. What makes that different is that it allows for peer-to-peer discussion on role definition and accountability and consistency with regard to developing employees at the divisional level. So that's new for us. We started that last year. We'll be doing that again this year. Logistically speaking, this is a pretty big commitment. It requires a ton of coordination and requires for sister divisions to cover the management and the daily supervision while that division's management team is away training. A division is typically comprised of a captain, anywhere from 1 to 3 lieutenants based on service areas, and 6 sergeants for every service area plus an investigative sergeant's team. So those management teams are pretty sizable. Again, the forum provides for consistency within the division based on the unique characteristics of that division. In 2014, as was reported at our last session, the emphasis of training was role definition, accountability, cultural change, communication, and liability mitigation. This year's training, which starts on Monday, is going to run through November, 15 full week sessions, and it's going to focus predominantly on creating an environment that holds employees accountable to the tenets of procedural justice, not just externally, but with an internal emphasis as well, so inside the organization. And the Chiefs Executive Committee was the first audience for some of this training just about a month and a half ago.
The update to this recommendation is that we are looking at promoting a group of sergeants, 10 sergeants, in the fall. So we have asked for the certification list for that.
And recommendation number 14, more training on accountability and the application of principles of equity and fairness for first-line supervisors. We actually started several months ago a 10-hour block of training done by our Human Resources Division to cover a variety of topics. There were, as I said, 5 sessions identified. The first was a general overview of discipline and misconduct versus performance. The second was regarding investigations on employees. The third was performance-related discipline and evaluations, which is heavily emphasized throughout the report. The fourth is misconduct discipline documents in a review process. And the fifth, which actually is scheduled to start, I believe, tomorrow, is on employee appeal hearings. There also will be significant discussion at the command training in the confines of the division with the captain, the lieutenants, and the sergeants to ensure that, especially at the divisional level, there is a level of consistency. And recommendation number 15, the SDPD should identify ways to measure whether personnel are applying the principles of community policing and procedural justice in carrying out their duties. The starting point for this is really through our command training. It's going to allow for a healthy discussion to happen at the divisional level and to isolate the behaviors that we best believe exemplify the practice of procedural justice. The second step, which will happen after the conclusion of all 15 rounds, all 15 divisions getting the training, is that we're going to review our existing evaluations and make any revisions as needed. But that really needs everybody's input to make it a meaningful document. And recommendation 16, personnel development strategy to develop and retain its existing personnel. Our current evaluation process could be supplemented through the career enhancement plan. This is already a document that's available to us that is used quite frequently in a lot of departments. We haven't done the best job of this. This is going to serve as a document for, again, discussion at the command training with the captains giving their specific expectations to their lieutenants and sergeants about what it is that they want to see the conversations between sergeants and the line officer are about career development, about the necessity to purposely assign officers to places where they can enhance their potential for moving on and really understanding the full function of the organization. 17, leaders may want to develop the department's directives to emphasize the roles and responsibilities of supervisors. The roles and responsibilities about our supervisors were discussed in depth at the 2014 command training. We had a new chief put in place, and a lot of the ways we did business changed with regard to the information going up and information going down. In theory, the evaluation forms already capture a lot of the information we're looking for. There is an extensive area in all of our evaluation forms at the leadership level for interpersonal skills, leadership skills, and again, this discussion will be emphasized at the command training based on the captain's expectations, and we may do some revamping.
Recommendation number 18 has been implemented, and all positive feedback is given to the employee through the chain of command, and it's done in a timely manner. Also, our discipline manual was updated to reflect that supervisors shall provide all positive community feedback to the officer on all occasions when the officer has received a commendation for engaging the community. Now, the following recommendations, 19 through 25, all pertain to our early identification and intervention system. I'm going to discuss all of these recommendations together as one EIIS system containing many different components. Now, here's the update to this, what we spoke about last time, is that we agree that a data-based EIIS system is an extremely important tool and resource. And as you heard at our last presentation, although we have already currently an EIIS system, we recognize it is not as effective as it needs to be, and we are actively looking how it can be improved utilizing all of these recommendations. Just to refresh your memory, we will forward through each of these recommendations. And as Chief Creighton advances each of these slides regarding the EIIS recommendations, I want everyone to know that our department has conducted research of other police agencies that utilize EIIS systems in order to locate best practices. Our department has reviewed systems from the Seattle, Albuquerque, Washington, D.C. Metro, Austin, Newark, and New Orleans police departments. We are also meeting with Chief Timothy Longo next week, next Friday, on August the 7th. Chief Longo is the Chief of Police of the Charlottesville, Virginia Police Department, and he is a nationally recognized expert in the area of EIIS. I also attended a major city chiefs conference where I had the opportunity to speak very frankly with other chiefs on the topic of EIIS to gain insight into their different EIIS systems. This next recommendation, recommendation number 28, this is actually, it says implementation in progress because what we spoke about before is that with the Citizens Review Board, an Excel-based tracking system, it was developed for the Citizens Review Board, and it was added to our SharePoint, which will allow the Citizens Review Board and Internal Affairs access to the Excel report. It will provide the CRB members with a process to track the status of the complaints. The only reason why it doesn't say implemented already is that we are still testing to make sure it's working how we want it to work. We're getting feedback regarding that, and pending the outcome of the results of the testing phase, which we're currently in right now, we'll be able to say that it's implemented. But we want to make sure that everybody likes the way that it's being used. So we're so far talking with the CRB members. So far it's working, appears to be working well. But we want to run it a little longer just to make sure that we don't have to do any more modifications to it until we say that it's implemented. Now, recommendations 29 and 30, they're both very similar in nature, and they both regard the proper documentation of complaints. Both of these recommendations have been implemented. 29 and 30 have been implemented, and Department Procedure 1.10, which discusses the citizens' complaint procedure, was updated to reflect the changes to this. Recommendation number 32. This is, has to do with if the commanding officer wants to go outside the matrix to discipline an officer, what the process is for that. The update is that the commanding officers will be required to receive approval from their assistant chief if they do decide to administer discipline which is outside of our department discipline matrix. We have discussed, spent quite a bit of time discussing what would be the best practice to accomplish this recommendation, and we are considering using a sign-off tracking sheet for this recommendation. We will also be meeting with the Police Officers Association to discuss the process of that tracking sheet and what that's going to look like, but it will be documented.
And recommendation number 30 is about rebuilding trust with the community through procedural justice. We recognize that the structure has to support the philosophy of procedural justice, our structure as a police department. We know that procedural justice delivery is what allows for effective community-oriented policing. The procedural justice implementation model that was presented at the beginning of this presentation shows how every part of our department aims to support the philosophy through candidate identification. In other words, what traits are we looking for in our future officers, how we hire, recruit, and outreach, what our training looks like, how we evaluate and discipline. In other words, when we see it modeled well and when we don't see it modeled well, what do we do? Who we promote based on what behaviors they've demonstrated, effective community partnerships based on best practices, and mostly a top-down commitment, including an emphasis on being procedurally just internally with our employees. The working group that's spoken about in the report consists of psychologist and criminal justice professor Dan Bloomberg, Minister Hugh Mohammed, Captain Chuck Kay, who is the Central Division Captain, and Lieutenant Charles Lara, who is the Leadership Development Unit has oversight over that unit. Our task over the last year has been to look at where we can structurally reinforce areas that show our commitment to rebuilding trust that the community is asking for and that we know we need in order to be more effective. This work group is just the beginning, and several work groups are going to be put together, but several work groups already exist at the divisional level by way of captains' advisory groups, community-led problem-solving forums, Star Pal, and an abundance of many other forums throughout the city. The San Diego Police Department should consider a program that helps department officials to confront unconscious bias, such as fair and impartial policing program to address the concerns of bias-based policing raised by some community members. As mentioned during our last presentation, officers and sergeants are being formally trained during their advanced officer training since January 2015. Training occurs for them at an 18-month cycle. Command training, again, that starts on Monday, incorporates this time emotional intelligence, procedural justice, engaging in difficult conversations, and de-escalation, both mentally and physically, among several other very important topics. This training was created by San Diego PD, tailored to our needs based on, first, the fit to the organization, who we are versus who other agencies are, and academic appropriateness, and research and best practices, and a lot of input from a department psychologist who has 30 years of experience working with police officers. And also, the training has to be in the interest of being foundational to our growth as an effective community-oriented police agency. Augmented phase of training is also starting with our academy that graduates in a week, that is going to include an additional month of training that's referred to as an observational and community engagement phase. It's intended to bridge the academic and practical application gap in a very complex occupation. The emphasis during this month is to allow the new officers to see effective community policing demonstrated in a safe, unevaluated period where they can focus almost exclusively on the necessity of relationship building with those that we serve. During this time, the FTOs are going to work very closely with the community relations officers to provide as much exposure to community groups and forums as allowed in the interest of honing skills in a non-enforcement relationship building atmosphere. And we also have scheduled tours of a variety of community-based organizations that our newest officers are going to be participating in. And finally, we have already hosted, with assistance from your offices, 3 community training events. The next one, as was already mentioned, is September 5th. There are flyers in the back for anybody who wants to take one with all the contact information, so just walk away with one of those as you leave.
Recommendation 37. You may not know this, but the entire city is currently working on a citywide resident satisfaction survey, and the survey will also include police department customer satisfaction.
Recommendation 38, we should develop tailored cultural education involving community leaders and representatives to be delivered during lineup. We are doing that. I think, as I mentioned during the last presentation, we are currently reviewing training regarding the Muslim culture, trying to incorporate some city employees who are of that culture to hear their story and make it a little more personal and meaningful to our officers.
Recommendation 40, this has been implemented, and our website reflects the updated information on our goals, values, mission, vision of our police department. In conclusion, 6 of the remaining 25 recommendations have now been fully implemented. In addition, as you heard, several of our other recommendations, such as our recruiting efforts and our enhanced community outreach, have been considerably expanded and may have likely met the threshold of the PERF recommendation for implementation. However, we have chosen to maintain the status of implementation in process at this time as we continue to foster new collaborative relationships with all of our communities. This concludes our report, and we would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much to both of you. We appreciate all the information and the hard work you're doing at the police department to satisfy these recommendations from the PERF report. By the way, I know that there have been some comments about CRB, and that issue is docketed for our September meeting. And that meeting is September 23rd. For those interested in the Citizens Review Board, that will be the day of the hearing for that. Let's go now to public comments. Mark Robson. And because we've got a big agenda and lots of speakers, it's 2 minutes for each speaker. And while Mr. Robson is heading this way, Deborah Samuels will follow, and then Bob Kazuski. Mr. Robson, thank you for being here, and the floor is yours.
And thank you. My name is Mark Robson. I'm a community leader with the San Diego Organizing Project. So we're here to emphasize the importance of this conversation. We still see and hear examples from communities where people are unfairly treated and harassed by police. On Monday, we had a meeting at the church, and one of our ministers shared a story where he was pulled out of his car and made to put his hands on his hood with his 3 grandchildren, in the back seat. Then told it was a mistake. He was sent on his way. So this conversation is very important to us. It probably doesn't happen all the time, but it happens, and I hope that when it happens, that information gets back to the chief. We are grateful to see progress on many of the many of the comments has been made, but we still do not see a budget and a timeline as requested by the community. And the committee meets. the committee meets. Last time this was discussed, we discussed it with the committee the last time. So we need assurance that this report is being taken seriously. Only design resources, hard targets, and implementation goals will do that. We thank you for responding to our requests and to partner with trusted community organizers.
Thank you very much, Mr. Robson. Next up, Deborah Samuels, followed by Bob Kazuski. Good afternoon. Good to see you.
Good afternoon. Well, what I'm going to be talking about is about the evaluation of the forum that they had in San Diego on the recommendation 33. And we have that they need to have the adjustment in recommendation that last Thursday we had a forum at our congregation hosted for the first time all in Spanish, problem-solving meeting. And the community saw that reporting a crime is very important, that we give an input that there is for the Latino immigrant family to begin reporting the crime. They must trust and rebuild the trust in the long-term bilingual officers, that we need more bilingual officers that represent our community. And that we see that the 70% of Latino community in City Heights. Also, we thank the partnership with the San Diego PD in City Heights that we convinced them that there was a need in printing a Spanish information of the Spanish resource, the phone list, so that everyone can know what number to call, where to call. Also, we have that we need is 70% of, as I say, of the Latino communities, but the police in City Heights is not enough. So we need to have more Latinos, bilingual police. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kazuski. And Mr. Kazuski will be followed by Margaret Dooley Samuli.
Chief Zimmerman's procedural justice has failed. Her command training has failed. I've seen it firsthand. I've seen the abuses. I've seen the buddy-buddy system where the San Diego Police Department protects the son, the violent son, of a former police officer because he's the son of that former police officer. I've read former Sergeant David Jebb's book. It's right here. He quotes, after being asked to take on a special project, "Excellent," the lieutenant turned to me. "Okay, Blue, forget about the civil liberties lawyers. Forget about rules and regulations. Do whatever you have to do. We don't care if you have to bury these shitheads," in his words. "We want them off the streets. We want the people of Southeast to have their community back. Is that clear enough?" "Yes, sir, it's my duty." To my surprise, the captain stood up and leaned over his desk, knuckles planted firmly on the blotter. He says, "We'll cover your ass to the limit, Blue, as long as you keep your mouth shut about our agreement and as long as you don't get caught operating outside department policies or the law. If you get caught, we'll deny ever having this conversation." Do you understand what I'm saying? That's what David Jebb wrote in his book. Now, I don't know if that's true. It might be a fictional book. It is advertised as a fictional book. But this is the ethics that I believe that are in place in the San Diego Police Department. Now, I've asked to meet with you, Shelley Zimmerman, about the problems at the Torrey Pines Glider Port and about the officers that are making false arrests and sending people to jail, and the city cannot even press charges because there's nothing to charge a person on, and people are spending the night in jail without any due process. Now, I'm asking to meet with you again, Shelley Zimmerman, to talk about this problem.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kozuski, followed by Margaret Dooley Samuli? Samueli.
Yeah.
I'll get it right
like
one of
Samuel,
these days.
then he.
Right.
Good afternoon, Chair Emerald, members of the committee. My name is Margaret Dooley Samueli, the ACLU. Good afternoon, Chief, Assistant Chief. The ACLU appreciates everything the department is doing to implement the recommendations. It is, I believe, a good faith effort, and I think that what I want to point out in particular is the significant amount of additional training, hopefully the well-trained and well-prepared promotions to sergeants that will be happening. That was the oversight and supervision within the department stood out loud and clear from the Police Executive Research Forums report as something that was extremely problematic, and we are heartened that the department is taking that seriously and addressing that. We had hoped after the May meeting that we would see timelines. So obviously this is a work in progress. It's good to hear that the department doesn't want to consider things done when more training and more community engagement should be ongoing. At the same time, it would be helpful I think for the City Council and for the members of the public to understand the time frames where possible, even if it's a range. And again, cost, we have spoken. I understand that the early ID and intervention system, the cost is going to depend on what it looks like, and you don't know yet, but it's important, I think, for the public to hear that. And when we might have a sense of what that would look like, because that could potentially be at the very heart of internal supervision and accountability within the department. Then there's this, really important issue of what happens outside the department, or the interaction of officers and individuals on the street. And we've heard just a couple of stories about, obviously, that is not where we want it to be. And I do hope that the survey that is forthcoming of community residents, as well as the expected analysis of the vehicle stop demographic data that we expect, I think, in October, that I hope the department will look at that and be responsive to what the facts show us.
Thank you very much. And that concludes public comment. We'll go next to comments and questions from members of the committee. Mr. Kate, you're first on the lights.
Wrong button. Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Chief and Assistant Chief, for the presentation and all the work that you've put into this. I think it's really, really heartening, especially from the Academy standpoint, to see the diversity that's coming forward from the recruits and what we're putting forward. So I'm very optimistic about kind of the direction that the department's going in terms of hiring and who's going to be on our streets, and having officers that represent the community actually serving the public and the community that they come from. And there was a comment earlier about whether this is being taken seriously or not. I think obviously the department is taking this very seriously. I think Madam Chair is taking this seriously by docking this item, and I know that she'll continue to docket updates regarding these things. So I think that we are doing our due diligence in terms of making sure we're seeing some of these recommendations through and continuing to monitoring the progress of them all. And I want to make a comment about funding and budgeting, and I know all things have a cost to them, and I'll ask the question to you, Chief. It seems like a lot of them, even though there are costs associated with some of the implementation, the recommendations that go forward, but a lot of them are more of I think a management training that may not necessarily have a budgetary impact. Do you agree? I mean, to a certain extent, that a lot of them are just procedural in nature, I would say?
That's exactly correct, is that a lot of that we've been able to absorb the cost by, we're doing a lot of development, put a lot of work into this. We're having the trainers, what's fit for our own department for this. Some things will have a cost, such as the budget, maybe some other additional, as we look at our marketing campaign for recruits, other things, but we're not there yet to come. And I know you've been very open about it, if we need additional funds, so we can come forward with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll again repeat that same comments. You hit it head that we want to know, and we're willing to make the investments. I do have a couple questions, and you brought about advertising and marketing to enhance recruitment. Are you at liberty to kind of comment on somewhat what some of those things are, what those campaigns may consist of?
Yes, and I'd like to, at this time, he's doing a phenomenal job, bring up Lieutenant Al Leos, who is the person who's in charge, the commanding officer in charge of our backgrounds and recruiting unit, to brag, quite frankly, about the great work that his unit is doing.
And he's not surprised coming up this time, right?
No, not at all. Not at all. Thank you for having me. Good afternoon, Chair, Councilmember Emerald, and staff. And talking about a little bit about our marketing plan, we have a marketing plan that we put together, and it's at our command staff level that it's under review. But currently, what we're doing in advertising and recruiting is we're working with different universities, their social media, their online passing and sharing of information at the universities in Southern California. Like we talked about last time I was here, we're using a 6-hour radius in Southern California, Nevada, Phoenix, and Las Vegas, where we're targeting criminal justice, public administration, those kind of degrees. And what we do is we target them, the seniors, so when they graduate, they're looking for jobs, right, in law enforcement, and those are the ones we're targeting, so we could try to hire them when they graduate from college. Part of our advertising as well is we're using the community newspapers, Voice and Viewpoint, the Monitor. We're currently working on a contract right now with the Union Tribute for their online social media and job listings as well, so we are currently working with them as well. We also use the military bases as well. We're targeting our military, our veterans as well. We're currently recruiting on a monthly basis at our military bases, and we're also using their military advertising as well, which includes magazines and their social media as well. Cox Communication, we're also working with them as well. They put together some advertising for us, and we're currently working with them for a long documentary. It's a 4-part series. It will be shown in four sessions. Each one is half an hour long, and it's going to be on our hiring practice, our recruits in the academy, and after they get on their own in the field. So it's going to be a 4-part process that we're working with them as well. So that's kind of what we're targeting.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Mm-hmm. My last question, Chief, is in terms of the recommendation number 28 having to deal with the tracking system for the Citizens Review Board. And you mentioned that you're testing the Excel-based system through your SharePoints. Do you have an idea of how much longer the testing would be before implementation? Are you thinking before the end of the calendar year?
I think it probably no more than a month. I would imagine. It appears to be going well. One of the issues we had was was with IT, and actually the person that we were speaking with was off for a couple weeks, and so now that person is back, so that slowed it up for a couple weeks from IT. But now that person's back, and so far it seems to be working how we want it to work. But we just want to make sure. But I would anticipate if all goes as well, that be implemented within a month.
Fantastic. Well, again, thank you very much for the recommendations or the follow-up on the recommendations and how you docketed. I know that especially from community standpoint and being out in the community and learning that you are putting your money where your mouth is. I mean, we saw each other at the Interfaith Iftar a few weeks ago in Claremont, and you and other officers were there with members of the Muslim community as well, and other members of the community who were all there as well. And I appreciate the monitoring by the ACLU. I appreciate kind of what you've been doing and providing feedback as well. And I know that you'll be involved in this as well, too, and letting our offices know about further recommendations and how for implementation. So I appreciate that. And thank you, Madam Chair, again, for docketing this, and thank you for the presentation.
Thank you very much for your questions and comments. And I especially want to call out Lieutenant Leos. You are just the the supreme person to go out there recruiting. And I've got a 6-page list of all of your recruiting efforts, Chief, from 2014. We'd love to see a list from 15. But if you don't mind my saying, this last year we honored Lieutenant Leos with a proclamation for his commitment to community. 30 years ago, he was, I think, the only employee to survive the McDonald's massacre in San Ysidro, and that became an inspiration for you to protect others. And so you really walk the walk, man. You're just the person to go out and let people know that they can be part of something bigger than themselves. So thank you again for your public service. With that, let's...
We have the...
go ahead.
Lieutenant Leos just does an amazing job. Thank you for recognizing Lieutenant Leos. And we do have that list for 2015. If you'd like to see it, we have it.
Oh, terrific. Maybe we can make copies, let everybody know, because you are out there. In fact, I don't think you sleep. I'm still not convinced that you sleep. Let's go next to Ms. Cole.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Chief, for this update. Since our last report on the PERF in May, you have been in our community. You have been in our community. You have been into more than likely more meetings than I think I have because my staff sees you there. I also believe I called you one evening and you were at the San Diego Organizing Project meeting, meeting with them. So you are there. You also held a great training, as the chair said, at the Tubman Chavez Center for the non-bias based training. It was well received. We thank you for that. And you understand about trying to rebuild the relationships with our community. You understand that you're doing it. It's not going to happen overnight. It's not. But you're taking steps to get there, and I thank you for those steps that you're taking to rebuild that relationship with us. Like I said, it's not going to happen overnight, Chief, and we should know that. But you're doing a good job to make sure that the relationships are rebuilt in all the communities of color and within the city of San Diego also. I wanted to talk about one of the recommendations, the hiring advisory board. Who serves on that board, and how were the candidates chosen?
Yeah, I'd like to have, again, Lieutenant Leos come up.
Yes, Ms. Cole. The way we went about it was I've been a police officer now for 27 years. And throughout my career, I worked real closely with the community as an officer, community relations officer, patrol sergeant, area command lieutenant. And during that entire time, I've always worked with the advisory boards wherever I work, whichever community I work in. And I always felt it was very strong, that relationship that we've had throughout the years, and problem solving and working together to solve crime and social issues in our communities. So I felt it was very important that we have some form of a committee that's a part of our hiring and recruiting process. And that's how it came about. So what we did is we reached out to all the area command captains, since they already have their advisory boards, and we asked them to submit a couple of names from each area command, which they did. And that's how we formed this community recruiting advisory board. And the reason for it was just to be transparent, let them know what we're doing, how we're recruiting, how we're hiring, and what they can do to help us out. And so far, we met in June, and they've come up with numerous recommendations, and we're implementing some of those, including one of them that I just briefly talked about, which is a union tribute. We've never done any kind of recruiting, any kind of postings in the union tribute, and we're going to focus on that. They're also sharing with us other community events that we didn't know that existed out in the community. So now we're a part of those events as well. And they're continuing to supply us information, and we'll be out there. Any kind of event that's coming up, they let us know, and we show up in the communities.
And can you give us the names of those people that serve on that
We
board?
have them written down. If you like, I could present them to you.
Just afterwards, you can.
Afterwards,
yes, that would be fine.
Afterwards,
I would
okay,
appreciate
no problem.
that.
But that's how it came about. Again, it's a transparent. The mission is transparency, so they can help us in the recruiting hiring process as an advisory capacity.
And while you're there, I just also want to thank you for your recruiting efforts, your marketing efforts. You're right. You're in our Voice and Viewpoint, Monitor. You're all over, the marketing efforts in our district. So I appreciate that. And it's not cheap, to advertise. I know. So thank you for that. And thank you for all that you do on the police department. With regard to recommendation number 11, You mentioned that the executive committee attended a procedural justice and emotional intelligence training. What did the executive committee learn from that training? And could you highlight some of the
just the basic definition when we talk about procedural justice? What's the definition around the country? How does it fit in with the philosophy of community-oriented policing? Foundational. It's about relationships. It's about preserving the dignity of the person that you are dealing with, allowing for them to feel like they've been heard and like they have a role in a reciprocal relationship before you make your decision about what you're going to do. It's just the basic golden rule, if you will, in police speak. We wanted to take the opportunity to ensure that everybody from the assistant chief level up was fully committed to the tenets of procedural justice and understood how emotional intelligence really is the foundation, understanding that we are creatures of emotion. We can't help it. That's our go-to is immediately to emotion just based on the way that the brain works. And biases, implicit biases, are born in that region of the brain. And unless you deliberately do something to change the reference from which you're looking at things, to change the lenses from which you're seeing things, and if you think about it, our police officers see mostly negative. So their frame of reference going into contacts is going to be that immediate, God bless the amygdala, go to emotion. The last time I saw this, and 10 times prior to that, what the determination was, this was a bad situation. So their go-to emotion is going to be very negative. We have to get our officers to be able to de-escalate psychologically. This might be something a little bit different. And if they do emotionally overreact, then go back and do a debrief in your head about why you need to look at things differently. So it's really just about basic psychology of bias and what does procedural justice mean, internally and externally.
Good training, good. Thank you. And lastly, darn. I lost it, but let me try and get it back. I lost it. I just lost it. I know. I have them a lot. Oh, the last public comment regarding an officer stopping, doing a traffic stop, having that person put his hands on the hood of a car, and it's not the person, the person has family in the car. If they think that they've been treated unfairly, and would they just take the name of the officer and the badge and
we want to hear about these situations when someone doesn't believe that they have been, good customer service. And so if somebody has a complaint, we've been very open, very transparent about this. There are many ways to make a complaint. They should call their supervisor. The first step would be to ask to see a supervisor. There's many ways to get that information and to make a complaint if they have a complaint.
Thank you, Chief. And let's remember that. Let's go ahead and act on it. The gentleman Ms. Robinson, let's act on it then so that it could be nipped in the bud, so that the commanding officer can look at that and see if that person was treated unfairly. So let's go ahead and do that. And hopefully that won't happen in the future with that particular officer, or he'll learn how to treat people a little bit better. I know that my community keeps saying that that's happening. I know that it's going to get better, Chief. I know that. And lastly, I know that the community wants to see increased police community engagement. And I know that you're doing that. I know that you're saying that the officers are getting out of their cars, talking to the community. Can you sort of
Yeah, I know they are too, because I have the privilege of going to many community events throughout our entire city as the chief, and it is a privilege to do that. And I have heard I would say just about every community meeting, and usually multiple times at these community meetings, that individuals come up to me and say, I had the greatest experience just the other day that an officer got out of the car and said hello to me, and that meant so much to me. Please let the officer know how much I appreciate it. And that is happening time and time and time again. So I do know that that's happening.
Thank you, Chief. And I know that we still want to do community-oriented policing. I know that because I really want us to implement that. But again, thank you for what you're doing. It's going to get better. I know that. And just thank you, the police officers, America's finest. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's go next to Mr. Gloria on the lights.
Thank you, Ms. Emerald, and thank you, Chief, and to all the officers who are here to make this report. I appreciate, Ms. Emerald, the updates. I think it helps to communicate the overall seriousness in which we take the PERF report and the past instances of officer misconduct, always within the context of what happened here in San Diego, where it really was a small number of officers amongst a large field of incredible public safety professionals who do a great job each and every single day. I mentioned that because I think it's always important to have our situation taken in context. Lord knows there's been horrific things happening in other communities that have not happened here, and yet we do have our issues to deal with, and by having this on the agenda and looking at it frequently, I think communicates to the general public, to those who are watching in other jurisdictions, that we're serious about making sure that we enjoy the trust of the people that we serve. With that in mind, Chief, there are 40 overall recommendations, 15 of which were done almost immediately, correct? And then I think what I was trying to read from today's report, 6 of the remaining 25 are done, so there's 19 that are in progress. Is that right?
That is correct, and they're all in progress.
So roughly half are done. The remaining half, I think you answered in reference to Councilmember Kate's question, will be done shortly. Is that right? Like within a month?
Well, at least one in a month. There's others that will be done very shortly, yes.
Okay. I think that, like the comments of Mr. Kate and actually some members of the public, and we talked about this when we met at the Jacobs Center, I continue to be interested in knowing the true cost of the implementation of the PERF recommendations. I know I heard your answer to Mr. Kate. As the chair of the Budget Committee, I always believe if it's important, it's in the budget, right? And I think importantly, to the extent that we want to, again, communicate clearly to those in other places that are watching how we handle this report, to the extent that we fund corrections or changes, helps to further communicate that this is important. So is it your representation that you're still putting together what it's going to cost to implement all these? Or is it that we're doing it with existing resources? How exactly are we funding the implementation of all 40 recommendations?
It's both. Some we've been able to do in-house with our current budget, and I am sure that others, such as the EIS, we're going to have to come and ask for a sum of money. What that sum of money looks like, we'll know more over the next few months. As I say, we're meeting next Friday with Chief Longo. Once we look at developing that system for ourselves, we'll be able to have a better handle on that. But at this point, it would just be mere speculation. And when I come to you with a budget request, I'm going to be able to tell you exactly why. Because as you see, when we put these classes on, it's not all of a sudden that you can just go, tomorrow we're going to put this class on. Chief Creighton and her entire team, quite frankly, our entire police department has done a tremendous amount of research and work to tailor the training for our specific needs. And I will tell you that other police departments, not only looking at us as body-worn cameras, but we've already been contacted by other agencies asking about, what are you teaching on procedural justice? What are you teaching on confronting bias? So they're interested in what we're doing also, and it just takes time to do that. It hasn't necessarily taken money to do that, but it's been on-duty time so far to be able to implement or implementation on progress, a lot of those. But at the next update, I'll be able to, my hope is to have a better idea of to what the budget might look like for some of these other larger like EIS systems.
Okay, and I look forward to seeing that. I think that would go a long way to showing the public and others that we're serious, that we're not. Because, of course, a lot of this is training. A lot of it is I don't know what quite word to use, but it's not as tangible, right? I mean, there's trainings, but it's discussions. It's things that you may not be able to touch. And I think it could, if you had a negative eye or if you were, I think, harshly critical of the department, would be to say that it's not enough, right? And I don't get that sense from the report, either this one or the one in the past. And I think one of the ways to back that up is to say, no, actually, we put this amount of staff time towards this. This is how many dollars we've allocated, whether they're dollars that were already in your budget or additional allocations you asked from us. We know that the cost of a federal monitor and other things would become infinitely more expensive. But what I'm trying to paint the picture is that, as you are, that this is very serious, that it's being implemented accordingly. Along those lines, because so many of the recommendations, so many of the updates are in progress, and so many of the things that were recommended are difficult to measure, how can we as a council, as an overseeing body, how do we measure whether or not you're hitting your marks? How can we tell if you're enough of your officers have been trained, if that's being actually retained? Can you help us out on what we should be looking for to make sure we're holding you accountable to actually implementing these things appropriately?
I think, like we said that the last update that we were developing the program of what the training would look like. We've come back now just, less than 3 months and said, this is what the training looks like. We've just, gave you a presentation on it, and it starts Monday. And then we've told you how long it's going to take to do that. I think the next update, we'll be able to come back and say every one of our commands were trained. It did happen. It did take place. So I think that's a good measurement that we're following through on what we're saying that we're doing, and we've done that in every case. We have said that.
Okay,
and I would just add to that that the customer evaluations are going to say a lot, and the number of speakers that you have at future meetings about incidents that were less than stellar are going to be pretty representative of how well we're doing.
And Chief Creighton, that's why you're so good, because that was exactly where I was going next, which that's recommendation 37. Is that right? How many contacts are supervisors making with members of the public? It's I'm going to use the word vague, but I mean, how many are they expected to contact?
Well, we don't, get it. We don't say you have to get out of the car and you have to contact 10 people today or 12. But we don't have quotas. We don't have, with that. But what you've heard me say is that we go to a minimum of 140 community meetings every single month. We expect our officers to get out of the car and to contact community members in a non-enforcement, to build those relationships. There's not I would say a day goes by or a weekend that goes by if you're following us on social media and some of these other forums that we're not having, that we're having so many new things. We have Better the Block that's coming up, a new program that I know Councilmember Cole's familiar with, and that's going to be going out with One San Diego. But we also have you had cookies with the police officer, coffee with the police officer. So
I don't want to interrupt, but because those are all important things. But I think there's the mention of the command lieutenants who are reaching out to members of the public. How many is a command lieutenant expected to do? Again, trying to get to that metric. That's something that's specific.
I think we're going to have to ask Chief Jarvis to call. I don't recall what the specific number is. There is a specific number.
Chief Jarvis is the assistant chief over our patrol operations.
And he's awesome. Yeah.
Thank you.
Chief? The question was, one of the things that was of interest to me is asking command lieutenants to make contacts with members of the public who've had interaction with one of our officers. How many contacts are those lieutenants expected to make?
Right now they're expected to look at several different contacts that were made. We're looking at 2 per service area per month.
Okay.
So in Mid-City, for example, there's 3 service areas. So we'd be contacting 2 citizens per service area per month.
Okay.
And randomly, and that's a minimum. And many lieutenants are doing more than that.
And when will we know sort of the feedback on that? I recognize some of that's personnel, but
we already do. We already do know. I'm sure Chief Jarvis can.
We get the feedback. It's included in our quarterly management report.
No, me.
Whenever you'd like it.
Okay. Because I'm trying to drive to, we've taken this seriously. Someone will ask, what did you do, after you got the PERF report? I'm not asking you, I'm talking about me, right? And Mr. K and Ms. Cole, what did we do? Did we fund this thing correctly? We gave you $1 million for the body cameras. We're giving you some more. I want to see, when you say that they're being contacted, that may not be enough, but I could be wrong. If it's if it's 6 out of all of Mid-City per month, times 12. I'm not a math major, but I am in charge of the budget. Aren't you afraid? So I guess I'd like to know what that data or see what it is. I recognize it might be something that's not a public document because it's personnel related, but those are the kinds of things that I think would paint a picture, again, that you're being very serious about it, we're very, very serious about it, and that we're going to keep looking at this very closely. So I like that it's specific, that there's a minimum. I think that's good and again communicates the seriousness of it. I'd like to probably maybe know more about that going forward. Thank you. And just the last question, and thank you for the time, Ms. Emerald, is around the CRB. We had a few members of the public speak about this. I know that we have new leadership there, and you mentioned that this is going to be on a future agenda. I would be interested, Chief, if you had any recommendations or on what you'd like to, what you'd be perhaps willing to see change or want to see change. I know we have leadership from the Police Officers Association that's here. What they might be willing to recommend or support, but we know that the other communities are making changes. I'm never necessarily a believer that we have to do what LA does for a multitude of reasons, but that was mentioned that they're making some changes. I'd be curious to know what those are. So I'm talking over your time, but any suggestions on what we ought to do here? You've had the sort of SharePoint thing going on, but I suspect that people want to see more change in that area.
We work very closely with the new executive director of the Independent Citizens Review Board on Police Practices, Charlene Mosley, we work very closely. There's nothing that they ask for that we don't give them, as far as they have access to everything that, all reports, tape recordings, body-worn cameras. They have access to everything. We work very closely with them, and I have no recommendations at
Is Ms. Mosley here? Is she? And I had a great meeting with her in my office, and she knows that I'm interested in knowing what her recommendations are. She's still relatively new, so I think she's still getting her arms around it. But I think, again, one of the ways that we'll see that we're taking this seriously is there'll probably be some recommendations to change this. I'd like to do that very much in tandem with our Police Officers Association, knowing what to do to respect what is obviously a very difficult job. But I guess at the end of the day, Ms. Emerald, and because that's an area of I think that's extreme importance, I do have concerns about our response so far being an Excel spreadsheet. It doesn't seem sufficient. I know that that's more than what was being done before, so again, it's a step in the right direction. But I think we're going to have to augment that further in order to, again, make more of the case that we are interacting more closely, that there's more accountability, so on and so forth. These are not easy things, and I don't think that's anything that's going to be done probably even this calendar year. But it is something that's worth looking at closely, and you've already acknowledged that by adopting it. So thank you for the report, Chief. Chief Creighton, thank you as well. And look forward to seeing this again this summer.
And again, that discussion about CRB is September 23rd. And I would just ask members of the committee that if you have some questions, maybe put them in writing and get them over to Ms. Mosley so that she and her folks can research and come back with relevant information or the information that you're most especially interested in. Thank you very much. I just have a couple of questions for you, and then we'll wrap this up because I know we've got 6 more issues on the docket. First of all, the EIIS system. You say that it's currently capturing 14 indicators, and this is the system that's been in effect since 2010, I think. And that you're thinking of, the report recommends 5 additional indicators. What are those indicators?
Do you have any specific ones? I don't think I don't know off the top of my head if I have the specific ones, but quite frankly, we're looking at those 5, but we're looking at everything, as I said, in the entire process. Other departments have some of the indicators that we have. Others don't have some of the indicators that we have. Some of the EIS systems are more of a management tool. Some are more of a wellness tool. There's a hybrid of it. There's so much that we still need to learn and research about an EIS system. So that's why we took them all together.
I would like, if it's at all possible, for you to bring back at least those indicators, the indicators you want to include in the updated EIS system in January. And our independent budget analyst, Mr. Olson, is happy to work with you as well to see if there are what the costs are going to be or get a sense of that. So in January, we can start thinking about, as Mr. Gloria was saying, getting some more money for you to initiate this program in a timely fashion.
I'd like to actually bring up, and we might be able to answer that question, Sergeant Jeff Jordan, who's the administrator right now of our EIS system.
All right. Hello, Jeff. If you want to just sit down there, and you've got that little square button to turn on. Again, those 5 additional indicators, if you don't have them all decided now, coming back in January to give us some specifics that we can rely on.
Well, it's an interesting question that you asked, Councilmember Emerald, in that right now there's actually national research going on. President Obama has recently brought to bear the Task Force on 21st Century Policing, and a subset of that is the PDI, the Police Data Initiative. Basically what they're doing is, for the first time in a long time, while research has been done on EIS, there has been a lack of agreement a lot of researchers and people to analyze things as to what the best indicators are to track. There's not a consensus really that has been done on that. So we're monitoring what's being done at the national level. We're looking at the PDI. We're also going to be looking about, Chief Zimmerman laying out her vision as to what she wants and getting back to you hopefully in a timely manner. But there's not a lot of agreement about what we should be looking at. So I think that we need to take a really hard look at the department, and Chief Zimmerman's prepared to do that, especially with Chief Longo coming up. And so when the recommendations are made nationally, what you should be looking at right now, as an interesting point, PERF has actually asked for us to look at certain things that we purposely excluded early on in our early intervention system. So they seem to be in conflict, and we need to kind of go back and kind of reconcile that with some of their recommendations. Some of them are in the area of, pursuits or accommodations and, canine issues and bites and use of force tactics. And we're going to have to bring that all together and monitor all of that kind of and look at what's going on in best practices throughout the nation.
Gotcha. And we're talking about bites. We're talking about the canines.
Yes, we are.
Okay. But so the timing is everything here. It looks like, everybody is starting to focus on this because it is a nationwide issue. So come January, would you come back with give us a sense of the indicators that you're inclined to look at, and that'll give us a sense too of how resourceful we need to be to help you create this new system. And Mr. Olson is happy to talk with you, work with you, and to see if you need some extra money to continue this study and to start implementing as you will. So that's really important. And I think that the ACLU comment, too, about having a timeline is important. In this case, the timeline will come before the mid-year budget, and if you need extra money, we want to make sure you've got it because we want you to be successful. And let me just ask you one more question about the EIIS. For those who are uninitiated who wonder, what the heck is that? In layman's terms, in 30 seconds or less, tell us what this is and why it's important.
If anybody's ever seen the movie Moneyball, okay? Moneyball, the Oakland A's, Billy Beane of local fame, looked at or tried to embrace for the first time statistical analysis to look at baseball players as far as on-base percentage, and on-base percentage led to runs scored, and runs scored led to wins. Okay, so in certain cases, the best way to explain it is for the first time, really what's going on a broader scale is statistical analysis of officers' behaviors, or those maybe they're perceived to be some positive behaviors, some negative behaviors, problematic behaviors. Where are they taking the officer? Are they leading them down a path where we don't want them to go? Do they have an excessive number of complaints, or have they used force too often? And when you basically look at that and you begin to look at some of these indicators, do they reach a certain threshold where, one, we're looking at a couple different things. First, based on the statistical analysis, how are we identifying those officers? How are we going to intervene with them? What kind of interventions are we going to have? Counseling or other things that we're going to be reaching out to them? And then 3 is post-intervention kind of monitoring. We've identified certain problematic behaviors. We've looked at some of the interventions that we're going to bring to bear, and then how are we going to monitor those to make the best officer who's going to go back and best serve the community. And we're trying to do this, obviously, without discipline before it ever gets to that point, early on. Hence, Early Intervention Systems, EIS.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much for that. One more question. With regard to sergeants, you'll be promoting 10 more sergeants?
We believe likely 10 sometime in the fall.
Okay. In the meantime, you'll have acting sergeants coming up behind them?
Well, we currently have about 16, 17 acting sergeants now. That fluctuates to anywhere, usually between 15 and 20 at any time. So this should cut that down to around 10 or so.
Okay. The PERF report, page 46, talks about acting sergeants cannot access information in the EIIS system regarding their subordinates, who they oversee and manage, and do not have the same authority as full-fledged sergeants. Does this, in your mind, pose an accountability issue, or perhaps the need perhaps to create a different system?
Well, and then that all goes to the EIS, and that all goes to having fewer acting sergeants, and then also, goes to the lieutenant in order to, if there's an acting sergeant, to make sure that we monitor the EIS system. But all that is going to be all part of the procedure when we get the final implementation.
We really appreciate this report. Does anybody on the panel here have anything else you'd like to add, perhaps points you'd like to emphasize, questions that haven't been asked?
No, just again, is that I'm extremely proud as chief of police of all of our personnel in our department. That's not just our sworn, but it's our civilian, it's our volunteers. A lot of hard work, a tremendous amount of time and effort have gone into making sure that we have the greatest police department, and our officers every day, as we say, about 1.3 million calls a year into our communication center. They come in contact with millions of people, and the overwhelming number of our officers, civilian volunteers, serve every day with honor, distinction, personal courage, and they do that for the betterment of our city.
Thank you very much. We appreciate your presentation, all this information, and the hard work to respond to the PERF report. So thank you very much, all of you.